Hello and welcome to the History of Computing podcast. Today is September 4th, 2020, and it is Google's 22nd birthday. I'll spare you singing the birthday song and instead I'll weave you a story. We find ourselves in strange and uncertain times. The technology industry has always managed to respond to these strange and uncertain times with incredible innovations that lead to the next round of growth. Growth that often comes with much higher rewards and leaves the world in a state almost unimaginable in previous iterations. The last major inflection point for the internet and computing in general was right after the dot-com bubble burst. The companies that survived that time in the history of computing and stayed true to their course sparked the Web 2.0 revolution, and their shareholders were rewarded by going from exits and valuations in the millions in the dot-com era to going to the billions in the Web 2.0 era, and none were as iconic as Google. They finally solved how to make money at scale on the internet, and in the process validated that search was a great place to do so. Today, we can think of Google, or the resulting parent, Alphabet, as a multi-headed hydra. The biggest of those heads is search, which includes AdWords and AdSense. But Google has long since stopped being a one-trick pony. They also include Google Apps, Google Cloud, Gmail, YouTube, Google Nest, Verily, self-driving cars, mobile operating systems, and one of the most ambitious, Google Fiber. So how did two kids who were going to Stanford manage to become the third US company to be valued at over $1 trillion? Well, let's start by going back to 1998. The Big Lebowski, Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, There's Something About Mary, The Truman Show, Saving Private Ryan. These were all in the theaters. Puff Daddy hadn't transmogrified into P. Diddy, and Usher had 3 songs in the top 40. Boyz II Men, Backstreet Boys, Shania Twain, and Third Eye Blind couldn't be avoided on the airwaves. They're now pretty much regulated to 90s disco nights, but technology, that offered a bright spot. We got the first MP3 player, the Apple Newton, the Intel Celeron and Xeon chips, the Apple iMac, MySQL, V90 modem, StarCraft, and these 2 Stanford students named Larry Page and Sergey Brin took a research project they started in 1996 with Scott Hansen and started a company called Google. There were search engines before Page and Brin, but most produced search results that just weren't great because it was the number of times a term appeared on a page. In fact, most of these companies were focused on becoming portals. They took their cue from AOL and other ISPs who had springboarded people onto the web from services that had been walled gardens before. As they became interconnected into a truly open internet, the amount of diverse content began to explode, and people just getting online found it hard to actually find things they were interested in. Going from ISPs, who had portals, to getting on the internet, many began using a starting page like Archie, Lycos, Jughead, Veronica, InfoSeek, and of course Yahoo. Yahoo had grown fast out of Stanford, having been founded by Jerry Yang and David Filo. By 98, the Yahoo page, though, was so full of text. They had stock tickers, links to shopping, and horoscopes. It took a lot of the features from the community builders at AOL, but the model to make money was banner ads, and that meant keeping people on their pages. Because it wasn't yet monetized, and in fact acted against the banner loading business model, searching for what you really wanted to find on the internet didn't really get a lot of love. The search engines or portals of the day had pretty crappy search engines compared to what Page and Brin were building, and they knew it. They initially called the search engine Backrub back in 1996. As academics and the children of academics, they knew that the more papers that cited another paper, the more valuable that paper was. Applying that same logic allowed them to rank websites based on how many other sites linked to it. This became the foundation of the original PageRank algorithm, which continues to evolve today. The name backrub came from the concept of weighting based on backlinks. That concept had come from a tool called RankDex, which was developed by Robert Lee, who went on to found Baidu. Now, keep in mind, it started as a research project. The transition from research project meant finding a good name. Being math nerds, they landed on Google, a play on Google, or a 1 followed by 100 zeros. And within a year, they were still running off University of Stanford computers. As their crawlers searched the web, they needed more and more computing time. So they went out looking for funding, and in 1998 got $100,000 from Sun Microsystems co-founder Andy Bechtolstein. Jeff Bezos from Amazon, David Cheriton, Ram Shriram, and others kicked in some money as well, and they got $1 million round of angel investment. And their algorithm kept getting more and more mature as they were able to catalog more and more sites. By 1999, they went out and raised $25 million from Kleiner Perkins and Sequoia Capital, insisting the two invest equally, which hadn't been done before. They were frugal with their money, which allowed them to weather the coming storm when the dot-com bubble burst. They built their computers to process data using off-the-shelf hardware they got at Fry's and other computer stores. They brought in some of the best talent in the area as other companies were going bankrupt. They also used the money to move into offices in Palo Alto, and in 2000 started selling ads through a service they called AdWords. It was a simple site and ads were text instead of the banners that were popular at the time. It loaded fast. It was an instant success, and I remember being drawn to it after years of looking at that increasingly complicated Yahoo landing page. And they successfully inked a deal with Yahoo to provide organic and paid search, betting the company that they can make lots of money for everyone. And they were right. The world was ready for simple interfaces that provide relevant results. And the results were relevant for advertisers who could move to a pay-per-click model and bid on how much they wanted to pay for each click. They could serve ads for nearly any company and with little human interaction because they spent the time and money to build great AI to power the system. You put in a credit card number and they got accurate projections on how successful an ad would be. In fact, ads that were relevant often charged advertisers less for clicking than those that weren't. And it quickly became apparent that they were just printing money on the back of this new ad system. They brought in Eric Schmidt to run the company per the agreement they made when they raised the $25 million, and by 2002, they were booking $400 million in revenue, and they operated at a 60% margin. Those are crazy numbers and enabled them to continue aggressively making investments. The dot-com bubble may have burst, but Google was a clear beacon of light that the internet wasn't done. And one of its stars, Sheryl Sandberg, was running that part of the show. In 2003, Google moved into a space now referred to as the Googleplex in Mountain View, California, in a sign of the times that was land formerly owned by Silicon Graphics. They continued to iterate and improve on their ad model, and they did it with $1.5 billion in revenue at that point. Google went public in 2004 with revenues of $3.2 billion. It was underwritten by Morgan Stanley and Credit Suisse, who took half the standard fees for leading the IPO. Google sold nearly 20 million shares. By then, they were basically printing money. The company had a market cap of $23 billion, just below that of Yahoo. That's the year they acquired Where2 Technologies to convert their mapping technology into Google Maps, which was launched in 2005. They also bought Keyhole in 2004 which the CIA had invested in, and that was released as Google Earth in 2005. That technology then became critical for turn-by-turn directions, and the directions were enriched using another 2004 acquisition, ZipDash, to get real-time traffic information. At this point, Google wasn't just responding to queries about content on the web, but were able to respond to queries about the world at large. They also released Gmail and Google Books in 2004. By the end of 2005, they were up to $6.1 billion in revenue, and they continued to invest money into the company aggressively, looking not only to point users to pages, but get into content. That's when they bought Android in 2005, allowing them to answer queries using their own mobile operating system rather than just the web. On the back of $10.6 billion in revenue, they bought YouTube in 2006 for $1.65 billion in Google stock. This is also when they brought Gmail into the Google apps for your domain, which is now simply known as G Suite, and when they acquired Upstartle to get what we now call Google Docs. At $16.6 billion in revenues, they bought DoubleClick in 2007 for $3.1 billion to get the relationships Google had with the ad agencies. They also acquired Tonic Systems in 2007, which would become Google Slides. This completed a suite of apps that could take on Microsoft Office. But then they were at $16.6 billion in revenues. The first Android release came in 2008 on the back of $21.8 billion in revenues. They also released Chrome that year, a project that came out of hiring a number of Mozilla Firefox developers, even after current CEO Eric Schmidt had stonewalled doing so for 6 years. The project had been managed by up-and-coming Sundar Pichai. That year, they also released Google App Engine to compete with Amazon's EC2. In 2009, they bought Onto, Recaptcha, AdMob, VoIP company Gizmo5, Terracent, and AppJet, and got to $23.7 billion in revenue. And then in 2010, they bought Aardvark, Remail, Picnic, DocVerse, Episodic, Plink, Agnalux, Lab Pixies, BumpTop, Global IP Solutions, Simplify Media, Ruba.com, Invite Media, MetaWeb, ZetaWire, Instantation, Slide.com, Jambool, Like.com, Angstro, SocialDeck, QuickSee, Planner, BlindType, Phonetic Arts, and Widevine Technologies on the back of $29.3 billion in revenues. In 2011, Google bought Motorola Mobility for $12.5 billion to get access to patents for mobile phones, along with another almost 24 companies. And this was on the back of nearly $38 billion in revenue. The battle with Apple intensified when Apple removed Google Maps from iOS 6 in 2012. But on the backs of $50 billion in revenue, Google wasn't worried. They released the Chromebook in 2012, as well as announcing Google Fiber to be rolled out in Kansas City. They were all over the news. So then 2013, they launched Google Drive. They bought Waze for just shy of $1 billion to get crowdsourced data that could help bolster what Google Maps was doing. And that was on $55.5 billion in revenue. In 2014, at $65 billion in revenue, they bought Nest, getting thermostats and cameras in the portfolio. Pichai, who had worked in product on Drive, Gmail, Maps, and Chromebook, took over Android and by 2015 was named the CEO of Google, when Google restructured with Alphabet, created as the parent, and various companies that made up the portfolio. By then, they were up to $74.5 billion in revenue, and they needed a new structure given the size and scale of what they were doing, and given that they saw an easy doubling, if not more, of revenue within the next few years. By 2016, they launched Google Home, which has now brought AI into 52 million homes. They also bought nearly 20 other companies that year, including Apogee, to get an API management platform. By then, they were up to nearly $90 billion in revenue. 2017 saw revenues rise to $110 billion, and 28 saw them go up to $136 billion. In 2019, Pichai became the CEO of Alphabet, now presiding over the company with $160 billion revenues and a huge portfolio. One that has bought over 200 companies and employs over 123,000 humans. Google's mission is to organize the world's information and make it universally accessible and useful. And it's easy to connect most of the acquisitions with that goal, either directly or indirectly. I have a lot of friends in and out of IT that think Google is evil. Despite their desire not to do any evil, any organization that grows at such a mind-boggling pace is bound to rub people wrong here and there. I've always gladly used their free services, even knowing that when you're not paying for a product, you are the product. We have a lot to be thankful of Google for on this, their 22nd birthday. As Netscape was the symbol of the .com era, they are the symbol of the Web 2.0 era. They took the mantle for free mail from Hotmail after Microsoft screwed the pooch with it. They applied math to everything, revolutionizing marketing and helping people connect with information they were most interested in. They cobbled together a mapping solution and changed the way we navigate through cities and anywhere. They made Google Apps and evolved the way we use documents, making us more collaborative and forcing the competition, namely Microsoft, to adapt as well. They dominated the mobility market, capturing over 90% of devices. They innovated cloud stacks. And here's the crazy thing, from the beginning, they didn't make up a lot. They borrowed the foundational principles of that original algorithm from RankDex and just iterated and made it better. Gmail was a new and innovative approach to Hotmail. Google Apps was a better Encarta. Their cloud offerings were structured similar to those of Amazon. And the list of acquisitions that helped them get patents or talent or ideas to launch innovative services is just astounding. Chances are that today you do something that touches Google, whether it's the original search, controlling the lights in your house using Nest, using a web service hosted in their cloud, sending or receiving email through Gmail or one of their other hundreds of services. The team at Google has left an impact on each of the types of services they enable. They have innovated business and reaped the rewards. And on their 22nd birthday, we owe them a certain level of thanks for everything they've given us. So until next time, think about all the services you interact with and think about how you can improve on them. And thank you for tuning in to this episode of the History of Computing podcast. We are so lucky to have you. Have a great day.